Hello everybody, welcome back to the Sport Chippers YouTube page. I know what you're thinking, doesn't the Lady Bay Bridge look good this morning? Anyway, onto the Sport Chippers YouTube page and my guest today, Sean O'Driscoll, the former Forest manager. You are going to love this video, he's got so much of interest to say. I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks, what if Forest had not sacked him on Boxing Day with the club a point and a place outside of the Championship playoff places, a position they've very rarely been back to since those times. Anyway, fascinating chat from Sean O'Driscoll on the way. You will be hooked for all of it, I'm sure. He's on the way next. Sean, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you again. Let's go back to that time when you became the Forest manager, which seemed a kind of a confusing time from the outside anyway, with Tom, Dick and Harry linked with the job, a search for an iconic manager in quotes at the time. What were your feelings? What were your observations on what occurred at that point when you became the manager?
A bit like everybody else's, I suppose. It was I was at I'd sort of been a coach with Steve Cottrell, so Steve. We finished the season really well. I think points to game tally was quite good. So things were looking up then. And I think once Fowles, I don't know, that's the first thing I got a phone call from Steve saying that Fowles had started his long reign of getting rid of managers, and Steve was the first. And I was at that time I was at Crawley, and I got a phone call from Mark Arthur, who was the CEO at the time, asking about Steve Coppell, because Steve Coppell was the technical director or the sporting, whatever you want to call it, at Crawley, because he knew the businessman that owned the football club, who lived in Hong Kong. Again, bizarre turn of events, and he asked me to ask Steve Coppell if he would be interested in being the Forest manager. So that's how that all started. And then I spoke to Steve, and he didn't seem that interested, if I'm honest, but was willing to go down to London to talk to, at this time I didn't know whoever they were going to talk to. And I just went with him as a I don't know, as a friendly face, I suppose, just to introduce him to the various people that I knew. I wasn't in the meeting or anything. When he came out, he had declined it, but actually said to me, "It'd be a good job for you." I said, "Well, that's great, but they don't want me." They wanted some iconic ex-Manchester United, they were mad Manchester United fans, and it was like anybody with a connection with Man United, however tenuous, I think would have got the job at that particular time. Anyway, that was left, and then I just got another phone call about a week later from Mark Arthur saying, "Would you be interested in the job?" And I went, "Well, yeah, I would be, but I obviously knew the background." But anyway, so I had then a meeting at the same place, and that was my first experience of, I suppose, working with different cultures is probably the best way of putting it. When they actually offered me the job, and I asked a few pertinent questions about, as you would, what was their intentions, and how would they go about doing what they wanted to do, which then sort of visual memory of lots of Q80s talking amongst themselves in really high-pitched voices, as if I'd asked some sort of or I'd upset a load of people. It was like, and then they stormed off into another room, and their lawyer that was there, and I just said what I said, and he said, "Oh, in their culture, when somebody offers something, it's the custom to accept and not ask questions." So that was.
I mean, so it felt weird then from the start, did it? Because Steve Coppell has said, who I presume you got on pretty well with, because he's kind of recommended you as somebody who could do the job. He said, I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole, but here we are.
You Steve didn't. I think Steve, obviously Steve from a, it didn't. He had business interest in the Far East. It was the so he didn't really. It wasn't high on his agenda to sort of come back into football management.
Right.
So I think it was a passing comment. I think, but as we were sort of walking back to the train station, and yeah, the Mark Arthur phone call was out of the blue. To be fair, and I just think Mark thought that the club was sort of drifting a little bit, and they needed some stability. I think Rob Kelly, Paul Barron, and Jimmy were in charge of the club at the time. So they just needed somebody in quickly, I think. And I got on with Mark and John Pellin and quite a lot of the staff when I was there as a coach under Steve. So I think I was it's right place, right time, I suppose. Or right.
Did you hesitate at all?
Yeah.
Yes, well,
yeah.
We can maybe go to that a bit.
Whichever one you want to say it. So yeah, and he just said, yeah. So when I think Mark convinced Fawaz and that this might be probably an interim. I think I went in it with my eyes open that this could be quite a bumpy ride. But I must say that I sort of don't do these podcasts very often, but I've done a couple for Forest, and it's still when I look back at probably one of the most enjoyable times at a football club. I really enjoyed it from the moment I walked in as a sort of coach under Steve Cottrell till I got a phone call on Boxing Day while I was editing the Leeds game after we just won 4-1 to go, by the way, your services are no longer required. So it was almost deja vu, I suppose.
It felt a very kind of weird time. It felt, so the club needed to settle down, and you were kind of that figurehead, if you like, that was going to keep it calm, a slow build. You brought in players, we had loads of conversations, I seem to recall at the time, about the ambition of the club and the players you were bringing in just to steady things down. Simon Gillett and Danny Collins, James Coppinger, people like that you knew and had worked with. Was your kind of ambition and the club's ambition when you took over to keep it steady for that first season and maybe flirt with the top six, or was the ambition always greater than that?
I didn't really. Nobody really talked about sort of getting promoted. It was a case of, I think it was more concerned about the way they wanted to play more than anything else. I think the players that we had wanted to play a certain way. They were comfortable playing a certain way, but that gave, there's a few downsides to that. It's quite difficult if the players don't understand or they don't recognise that if you want to play a certain way, there's going to be periods when you're going to have to stick with it and be brave. And so it was bringing. I didn't think bring players just because I knew them. I thought they were good players that actually could do a job. Billy Sharp had 12 goals before Christmas, I think. When we got him in from Southampton, and Simon Gillett was one of those. And I tried to explain to Favres I just needed some glue in the team, and Simon was that. Simon was always going to be a short-term fix, and I told that Simon when we brought him in. This I just needed him to do a certain job at this particular time, and the club hopefully would progress, beyond what we wanted from Simon to do. So we had a lot of players that bought into, I think, to what we were trying to do, and because I had a relationship with the players before as I don't know, whatever you want to call me, assistant manager, first team coach, whatever. It was quite easy to make that jump into they knew what I was about. They'd see it. I think I could go on a lot of courses when they talk about being leaders and all this, and I'm always the one that puts my hand up and goes, I don't really want to be a leader. I want to be somebody who influences somebody, I think it's far easier to influence people when you're not the top man, because when you're the manager, everybody sort of bow down. You know what I mean? It's quite difficult for people to tell you what they really think unless you've got a really good relationship with them. So having that time as a coach, was just a member of staff, I think it was invaluable going forward. And we were trying to build a team that could take responsibility on the pitch really, and make their own decisions rather than look to the sidelines and what we got to do now, what we got to do now. I think we would get, and we'd fast track that really with bringing the players in that we had because of their background. A lot of them had been promoted from the Championship, so that was a good sign that they'd actually been through that process. And obviously players that I knew that I think could do a really good job in that environment. So the ambition, I suppose, was to win every game we played. And it was slowly. I hate looking back in hindsight and saying we were going to do this, we were going to do that, but there were really key moments in that season where the players took responsibility for things and were prepared to, okay, if I'm going to play this way, I've got to work. I've got to work hard, or extra special hard when we lose the ball, things like that. So getting somebody like Andy Reid, who was fantastic on the ball, to actually recognise that off the ball he's going to have to do a job for the team as well. And do it, understand that responsibility and actually buy into it and do it was massive. So we were getting there.
There is more on the way from Sean O'Driscoll in just a moment. You'll find out how he met his successor while O'Driscoll was still the Forest manager, twice at Forest games before he was sacked. That on the way very soon. If you're enjoying the video, can I ask that you give it a like, a thumbs up down below. That will send it to more people and really help my YouTube channel as well. And also, don't forget to subscribe. Let's get back though quickly to Sean O'Driscoll. When did you kind of think this isn't right? That maybe the circus was beginning to come to town, if you like, because that's what it. I mean, particularly after you've gone, but it felt perhaps as though that was gathering in your time. Was that fair? Were there any signs that things were going wobbly?
I wasn't privy to any. There were just things that affected me. So I'd get phone calls. Sort of late afternoon from Fawaz's people to say, could we have a meeting in London? And then the meeting would be 9 o'clock or something like that. Then I'd have to get a train from Nottingham down to London, sort of walk into his place in the West End or wherever it was, Mayfair, and he'd be in bed. So that was.
It's not a business-like look, is it?
Yeah, just things like that. You just go, but again, I suppose in hindsight, you look back and it's a different culture. Their culture's different. They don't, they sort of out all night and sleeping during the day. So 9 o'clock at night was probably his getting up time and getting ready to do whatever he was going to do. But it was bizarre when you sit down and when you sort of had a long day at football clubs to travel all the way down there and then have a chat about football.
Yeah,
seemed to be a little bit bizarre. And daft things that you saw, he had staff at his place, and just the way he spoke to his staff, the way he treated his staff, it's like, okay, he's not a man to be messed with. But it was fair, to be fair to him, he was fine with me. I get to a point where, look, I had to say, I have no problem chatting about football and talking about the team and this, that, and the other, but can we do it at a sensible time?
Yeah. I mean, football managers' hours are long enough as they are, aren't they?
Yeah. But again, and he wanted to do things. He wanted to take the players out for a meal. I remember in Nottingham, which is fine, it was good. But then when we got the details, it was 10 o'clock at night, and it was at a curry house or a curry restaurant or an Indian restaurant. And you just go, I'm not sure that's the greatest. I'm not sure the players will sort of enjoy that. 10 o'clock at night and actually having an Indian. I'm not one for curries anyway, so we had to sort of, can we get it a bit earlier so the players are not out all night. And then he did daft things like he'd had somebody make a great big cake full of all the players' names and things on it, and so that was a nice gesture. But I think he struggled to come to terms with English football. Keith Burst, who was the chief scout at the time, I think we were chatting, and when I arrived, there were 3 Kuwaiti players already in the building, and I remember Rob Kelly coming to me and saying, Sean, we've got a problem. We've got 3 Kuwaiti boys who are obviously not good enough for this standard, but they want them to sign them and this, that, and the other. So but I think rather than fight, but the boys themselves were fine. The boys were just doing what they were told. They had families back in Kuwait, so they were just, So when you chatted to them, they were like, "Sean, we don't want to be here either."
Right.
So, it wasn't something, So and they were on Ramadan and they were doing their first pre-season. None of them could. They got injured. It was a lot for them, and so I felt sorry for them, to be honest. But me and Keith were talking, and we said we need to see what the state of or how good curated football is. So we just offered, look, if you want us to go out and to watch a few games, then we will. So that went down really well, to be honest. They sort of were quite amenable to that. So I mean, Keith flew out for seemed to be 24 hours, got to Kuwait, watched the game under, you can imagine the heat involved, and then flew back. And it was just, I was really good eye opener to go. The sheikhs, which own the football clubs, the government owns the football clubs in Kuwait, and the sheikhs, the wealthy sheikhs, then are the benefactors, the people that sort of put the money in to get players in and to do what they do. And Fawaz's team, obviously he was a mad football fan, so he had plowed a lot of money into it to get the best players in Kuwait. So they won everything. They won the leagues, they won the cup. So he was just used to, well, if I just get the best players in, then I'm going to win everything. So I think he came over with that mentality, really. And he was always hands-on. So I think in Kuwait, he would pick the team. He would decide who plays, who doesn't play, what staff. So he was really a sort of owner, manager. Not sure he did the coaching, but he had a much more hands-on influence at his curated club than he could ever do at an English club, whether it was Forest or anywhere else. So I think that was a difficulty for him coming over to try and change, and for the people that worked for him and with him. How do we get him to understand when he's the owner? Lots of people say that football management, you've got to learn to manage upwards. And I agree, but I also think owners, billionaires and who own football clubs have a real difficulty of managing downwards. They usually tell people what to do and people just go, yes, sir, no, sir. Whereas with a football manager, that doesn't really work. So you've got to be able to, I manage up, but also managing down. And it's one area of football I don't think owners and football clubs ever, because nobody's going to tell them, well, I can do what I want to do because that's what happens. Rather than actually, how do I manage a group of people? And not bend them to your will, but actually get the best out of them, because they don't really have to do that. So that's one of the things maybe is the football environment or the football culture doesn't embrace very well. But he struggled with that, and so everything then became, if we lost a game, then it was because whatever. I don't think he could comprehend that actually the only certainty going into a championship season is that you were going to lose some games of football. So every loss seemed to be a catastrophe, and not at that time I didn't know about that, but talking to people since then, and it was, everything was questioned, everything was like everything else. Why did Gareth Southgate play 3 attacking midfield players last night? It's like, if he won 6-0, then hero, and if he doesn't play the 3 attacking midfield players and they drew 1-1, it'd be like, why didn't you do this? So you can't win. So the result dictates everything. So you just have to live with it.
Yeah. Was there tension about signing players? I mean, because we touched on the players you signed to start with, but did he want to bring different players in, not just the Kuwait players, but players that you didn't want necessarily?
No, I think Keith Burt did a really good job in trying to explain that, we wanted to bring players in that had that experience of getting out of the championship. So that was, and we didn't waste. I didn't think we wasted money. I mean, I came from Doncaster, and we were, you have to be careful every penny, and whether you pay, £10 for a player or 10 million, you need value for money. So we were trying to get value for money with players. Simon Gillette was a great example. He sort of, when I wanted to sign Simon, I had to try and convince him. And then I think after Simon had played 2 games, he wanted to double his contract. I was like, no, it's fine. We're all right. You know, he just, no, it doesn't matter. He wanted to pay him. It's like, I remember telling Simon that, and they offered him an improved contract. And I think the agent then thought, oh, hang on, we're onto a good thing here. And the agent then went back and said, I just had to go to Simon. Simon, just sign this contract. This is, don't push this any further than it's going to be pushed, because it's, this is. So he did. I know we've talked about George Friend when we were desperate for a left back, and I wanted to sign George Friend, and then he just, because he didn't know him, he didn't want to sign him, and then Middlesbrough played at the City Ground, and he wanted to know who the left back was. We were bombing up and down the left hand side, and that's the guy that we could have signed. But so again, I think that's maybe if my kudos or my, I don't know, reputation, whether it was a bit higher, then that would have been a bit easier, but it wasn't. So yeah, and I think again he always wanted a stellar name, I suppose. He always wanted somebody that maybe he looked up to. I don't know.
Because that was the one I was going to ask about was Jermain Genius, who came in, I don't know, probably a couple of months before you left, off the top of my head. And that always felt as though that was Fawaz wanting a name rather than you wanting an extra midfielder. Yeah. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it was difficult for Jermain because he needed to play games and because he was plagued with injuries. So that was our biggest problem. Not that Jermain wasn't a really good player. It was like, well, he's a really good player, but how many times we could get him on the pitch? And I can remember talking to Jermain and telling him this situation. I can't guarantee you're going to play because it would be wrong for the rest of the players if they're doing, and he was fine. He actually came in and wasn't fit to play. So he had to spend some time to get him fit to play. So he was fine. He was, I think most players are. If you're upfront and honest with them, then I think they sort of accept it. I think a lot of players rather you tell them straight. And I said, I had no qualms about him, his ability, but could we get him on the pitch enough times to make a difference? And that proved really to be the problem. When we did get him on the pitch, he was fantastic, but he can never get him in a consistent number of games. So when you talk about value for money, he probably wasn't because we couldn't get him enough playing time. So I think you have to look at things like that, whereas Fawaz or his people, and he got manipulated by agents as well. I mean, agents are really good at actually looking at somebody who's throwing money around, and then, and that's what they do. Their job is to get the best deal they can for their clients, so you can't blame them. But I think he got sort of caught in the starry lights of the attention that I suppose being the owner of a massive club like Forest can bring. And I think he got a little bit, he did. He got manipulated by agents. I think, especially in my time with them, I'll imagine afterwards as well.
When did you think, or when did it occur to you that you might be on slightly dodgy ground?
As soon as I signed the contract. I went with it with my eyes opened. I got a surprise when it was Boxing Day when we just beat Leeds, and I'm sitting at home and editing the video for the next day's training. So that was a bit of a surprise to go, oh, okay. But I suppose deep down it wasn't. And it was always going to end. I'd have to win. I'd have to win every game, get promoted, and all that. And then it would have happened. If you got in the Premier Division, you would have lost 2 or 3, and then it would have happened sooner. I just think it was. I think everybody felt, the players, the staff felt it was the wrong time. That's probably the one thing that the fact I'm still doing podcasts 8 years, 9, 10 years, is that because I don't know, because I think when you get to a football club, to try and get all the ingredients right is a hard job, but people say you need time, and again, you do, but I think you need understanding more than you need time, because if you get an understanding of what you're trying to do, people will give you time. So I think the understanding is the big issue, and I think we had, especially the coaching staff with Jimmy, Paul, and Rob. Yeah, so that was a really good unit, because I'd come in really as an outsider, and sort of I spent my first probably 2 months trying to forge relationships, because they thought I came in just to spy on them for Steve Cottrell, really. And so that was really an interesting time for me. But we ended up being really good friends, and still speak to them to this day. So that was really good. So we had a really good coaching setup. Keith Burt was obviously a friend of Steve's, but he knew everybody. So as the chief scouter, so that was really good as well. So I'd known Keith from my Doncaster days, so that was a relationship. John Pellin, who was and Mark Arthur from the CEO, and that, and I know Johnny Harrow, the analyst, who I'd known previously as well. So we had that thing was really quite, in a short period of time, that was really set up. And then the players had knew me from before. And then I think if I'm one thing, I'm consistent. So if I'm going to be, I'm not. And I think players, even if you're a ranter and raver, but you're a consistent ranter and raver, then the players will understand it. So whatever consistency you are, then I think the players know where they stand, and they go, okay, that's So, and I was trying to be really, and I was always consistent with them, to tell them the good and the bad, and this is the way we do things. And I was really open to them taking responsibility for their performances, and giving them a little bit more freedom on the pitch to do what they thought was right. And so that was coming, that's quite a new approach for players who had been told what to do this, do that. So that was coming to fruition. We were finally getting to a place where the players were comfortable actually doing that. So there's lots of things I think were going in the right direction. But again, if there's no understanding of where they're going, then it's so probably the key people that we needed to influence, we didn't. But that was always going to be difficult, because if people don't want to listen, then it's quite difficult to to make them understand. And he was, they're from different cultures, and it was. I even now, I'm thinking, what would you do differently? And it would be difficult to do anything difficultly, really. He had somebody in the building who sort of was in every meeting, sort of was there as really as his eyes and ears, and I personally thought we had a really good relationship. We didn't hide anything. We knew he was going back to Far West to tell him things, but you hope that when you talk to the players, and so you'd hope that message had gone past, that this is coming together in a relatively short period of time as well. But obviously not.
I mean, the frustration and the reason you talked about the podcast and being on them 10 years later or whatever is because I think a lot of Forest fans are frustrated that they were in this position, a point off the playoffs, just thumped Leeds, and it felt like, to be fair, I think you'd probably gotten 6-7 games without a win before that, but it felt like the club was progressing slowly in the right direction, and it probably hasn't been in that place, or it's very rarely been in that place since you left. Do you kind of, when you look at it now, or when you looked at it under the Fawaz era, did you have a little chuckle to yourself, or did you feel annoyed? How did you kind of deal with leaving and then seeing what unfolded afterwards?
I think I was probably more annoyed that, and this is nothing to do with the actual individual, but I sort of left, and then Alex McLeish came in, and obviously that was a quick turnaround. So that was already planned, and that was already in the pipeline. And I'd met Alex at 2 games, so we played Peterborough away, and I know Darren Ferguson really well. So I went in to see Darren. We'd won the game, and I went to see Darren after the game, and Alex was in there, so we were chatting, and then we're at Wolverhampton Wanderers, and again we'd won the game, and all my family were there because everybody's from the Wolves, they're all big Wolves fans. So I went in to see my family, and Alex McLeishy's chatting to my family,
Right.
and then you find that. So that was I found that a little bit okay. You put 2 and 2 together, and maybe you come up with something that wasn't particularly right. But that probably that thing annoyed me more than anything else. Not because like I said, I'd gone into it with my eyes open, so it's just part and parcel of football. So there's no point in getting upset about that. But the fact that somebody was there in a couple of games and I hadn't put 2 together, so I'm a bit annoyed with myself, I suppose. But no, I've tried not to be. I think looking back in football is a waste of time. It is what it is. You know what it's like going into it. And
it's interesting. You said you kind of had your eyes open from the beginning. You kind of, you almost said, I don't want to misquote what you said much earlier, but you said something about you felt as though you were a temporary stand-in manager, which is a heck of an insight into a new appointment as manager.
Yeah, but again, when you look back at football, that year was probably one of the most enjoyable times I've had in football. I really liked the club. I think I was a really good fit. I'd spent time watching the youth team on a Saturday morning, and I remember, turning up at the game at the training ground, and people sort of a bit gobsmacked that the manager of the club was coming to watch the 18s on a Saturday morning. So you're constantly building relationships with people to say, look, I can't get that involved into the academy, but I'm interested. And I remember they played Barnsley, I think, and they won. It was a really good game, and Forest boys won. But the Barnsley boys really tried to play. Were really trying to, I thought, play really well, but they're just Forest under 18s were too good. I remember just chatting to the Barnsley coaches and said, could I have a word with the boys, and just said to them, I just think you played really well. You've lost the game, but you've played really well. Just because I think if I've started off in youth team football, so if the opposing manager had ever come to my boys and tried to and said that type of thing, I think it's so powerful, to actually say, look, we might have lost, but we're trying to do the right things, and you've got to stick with it, which is what we were trying to do with the first team boys. We think we're doing the right thing, so we're never going to win every game, but stick with it. So it just felt right, I suppose. It's a shame, and you sort of look at Forest as you from then on and see what's happening, and you just think, oh my God. I'm sure the supporters get fed up with, here we go. I think the last time I did this podcast, Chris Hughton was the manager, and I was saying the same things. Chris has got a really good reputation amongst football people, and I don't know why it didn't work out for him. Maybe he needed understanding rather than time. I don't know. But again, and I know Steve Cooper from my work with the FA, and again, he seems a really good fit for Forest, and you just hope that he gets there's an understanding of what the club needs. I know what it wants, but what it needs at this particular time is probably different to what it wants, and I think you've got to sort that out first. But Steve's a really good coach. I think the players will enjoy working with him. So fingers crossed.
Sean, I really appreciate your time, and I can honestly say I think I learned more from you. We probably must have spent hours in your office chatting after interviews, I think, and you showing me things on a whiteboard and how you picked your assistant managers and all the kind of the opposites attract type thing. So appreciate your time, and thanks for educating me a lot about football when you're in charge. I really appreciate it.
No worries, Robin. All the best.